Have you ever wondered why Magic in 2025 is how it is? I guess I should explain what I mean. By how it is, I mean an ever-increasing and seemingly endless amount of secret layer drops. I mean 7 standard sets next year, up from the normal 4. I mean more than half of sets being Universes Beyond, and many of them selling at increased prices. Basically, by 2025 Magic, I mean tons and tons of cards and products and sets sold at an ever-increasing price point. The answer to this, at its most base level, is perhaps unsurprising. And that's money. I recently fell down a bit of a rabbit hole of Hasbro, the parent company of Wizards of the Coast that makes Magic the Gathering, Hasbro's financials, and the results kind of blew my mind, and I'm convinced that they explain everything that Magic is today and everything that has happened in Magic over the past decade or so. Before jumping down this rabbit hole together, I should make it very clear that my goal today isn't to pass any sort of judgment on 2025 Magic. This isn't a video about whether Universes Beyond sets should exist, or how many sets should exist in Standard, or how many secret layers or too many secret layers. My goal is to simply lay out why I think Magic is how it is in 2025, and how we got here using as much data as possible to back up my beliefs. Whether 2025 Magic is good or bad, better or worse, is really beyond the scope of this video. Plus, it really depends on you personally. It's probably better for some people and worse for others, but that's not what we're talking about today. Super quick, if you need some Magic cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. So this all started the way any good internet rabbit hole starts, which is with a half-joking throwaway comment on Twitter. So there's a Twitter thread about the Dwight from The Office secret layer drop, where someone replied, well, what is Hasbro going bankrupt? And I said, half joking, well, if you discount Magic, they pretty much are. After this, my buddy James, who I've debated Magic finance with for more than a decade now, chimed in and basically said, stop saying it, it's not true, Hasbro's not going broke without Wizards. So like any self-respecting person of the internet, I did the only thing I could do, which is try to figure out if it was true or not. What does Hasbro's finances look like if you exclude Wizard? How dependent on Wizards of the Coast and Magic are Hasbro to stay in business? How has it changed over the years? And that's our focus today. The best, and I think probably only way to figure this out, is to go directly to the source. Every publicly traded company like Hasbro has to file a quarterly report every 3 months going over their finances, and at the end of the year, they publish an annual report that goes over their finances for the entire year. All of this information is publicly available. It's just incredibly boring and dry unless you're into that kind of thing, and thankfully, I do kind of enjoy that kind of stuff, so I spent hours digging through Hasbro's financial records, and I can honestly say that what I found pretty much shocked me, to the point where I now am convinced that these numbers and this data is basically Magic's theory of everything that explains what the game is today and how we got there over the past 10 years or so. Now, I'm going to try from getting too far into the weeds on the technical stuff here because I don't want to lose anyone, but you do need to understand some basics of how Hasbro is structured for any of this to make sense. Hasbro breaks down its brands into 3 segments. One is Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming, which is obviously the category that Magic is in, and we're going to talk more about this category in just a minute. The second is entertainment, which is movies and TV shows and the like. And the third is consumer products, which is where you find Play-Doh and Furbies and Tonka trucks, all the kind of toys and stuff that Hasbro sells. Unfortunately, Hasbro's financials don't break down things even further, so we can't say specifically like how much money an individual secret layer drop makes or how much Magic Arena makes compared to paper Magic directly, but the best estimates that I've seen suggest that in the Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment, Magic the Gathering makes up about 80% of that segment, and then Dungeons & Dragons is about 10% of that segment. Currently, Monopoly Go is around 8% because it's been doing pretty well over the past year or so. And then there's a couple of percent for licensing, which is like residual income from Baldur's Gate that released a few years ago, stuff with the new Exodus game that they're apparently involved in. But really the big number here is Magic is somewhere around 80% of the Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment, and this lines up with some other things Wizards have said. A couple of years ago, they announced that Magic was now a billion-dollar brand, and if you look at their financials from last year, the entire digital gaming segment brought in $1.5 billion in revenue, and Magic was probably about 1.2 or 1.3, which is roughly 80%. So if you add all this together, really why the segment is called Wizards of the Coast and Digital Gaming, it's really Magic the Gathering and a few other things that don't make nearly as much money as Magic. Anyway, with the help of these three segments, we can figure out just how much Wizards and Magic makes and how much they contribute to Hasbro's bottom line, and honestly, the numbers absolutely shocked me. Before I show you the numbers, I'm going to ask you to guess. Think for a minute. What percentage of the actual profit that Hasbro, the entire company with Play-Doh and Furbies and My Little Ponies and D&D and all that, what percentage of the money that Hasbro makes do you think comes from Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering? Let's start with the most recent quarter, which is quarter 2 of 2025. In that quarter, Hasbro's adjusted operating profits, which is how much money it actually made, was $247.1 million. Of this, Wizards of the Coast made $241.8 million, consumer products made $1.2 million, and entertainment $10.1 million. If you actually add all this together, that means that in the latest quarter that Hasbro's reported their results for, Wizards of the Coast and Magic was 95% of the actual profit that went to Hasbro's pocket, and everything else was 5%. My initial reaction to this was it has to be an outlier. There's no way Magic and Wizards is 95% of Hasbro's earnings. After all, Hasbro themselves said that this quarter was influenced by Final Fantasy, a record-breaking release that made more money than any Magic set ever. So this is probably just a weird quarter, right? So I went back and looked at quarter 1 of 2025, the first 3 months of the year. This time Hasbro's total was $222.4 million, while Wizards made $230 million. And no, I didn't misspeak. That's not a typo. For the first 3 months of 2025, Wizards actually generated more than 100% of Hasbro's total profits because their other brands were actually losing money. Like consumer products lost $31 million during the first quarter, which means that if Magic didn't exist, Hasbro as a whole would have been in the red for the first quarter of 2025. They actually would have lost money. But I still couldn't believe that Hasbro, this 100-year-old company with some aged but pretty iconic properties, was that dependent on Magic the Gathering to stay afloat. So I went back and looked at the annual report for 2024, which is the most recent one available, which takes into account the entire year. While Hasbro's other divisions fared a little bit better here, the end result of 2024 is that Wizards made 82% of the total profit at Hasbro, while everything else for the entire year made just 18%. The reason for this is margins. While Hasbro does generate revenue selling their other products, they simply don't make very much money off of them. For example, during the first quarter of the year, consumer products, the division that lost $31 million, actually generated $400 million in revenue. The problem was that their operating margin, which is how much money you actually make from the sale once you deduct all the costs, was negative 11%. So for every dollar that they would sell, they were actually losing 11 cents, which is probably not ideal. And their entertainment division was even worse at negative 41.9% during the quarter. Wizards of the Coast, on the other hand, had an operating margin of 49.8%, which means for every dollar that we spend on Magic, 50 cents is going directly into Hasbro's pockets. For context, the average profit margin for companies across industries is something like 8.5%. So Magic is like 6 times more profitable than the typical thing that you would be selling. Even if we look at the full year results, rather than the quarterly results, which can be more volatile, consumer products had a margin of 4.5% for the entire year of 2024, which was actually considered pretty good by Hasbro because the year before they were negative 2.2%, which means consumer products for the entire year of 2023 lost 2.2%. 2 cents for every dollar that they sold. Entertainment division lost money, of course, because of their sale of E1, but Wizards, for the entire year, had a stunning 41.8% profit margin. And all of this kind of makes sense if you really think about it. Magic cards sell for really high prices, but they're pretty cheap to produce. All you need is some cardboard, some ink, someone to design the cards, someone to make the art, which makes selling Magic cards incredibly profitable. So if we add all this together, the incentives become very clear. Most of Hasbro's products make very little money, and sometimes those products actually lose money to the point where everything they sell is actually taking money out of their pockets rather than putting it in, which is not where you want to be as a company. But Magic and Wizards, on the other hand, makes an absurd off-the-charts amount of money. Let's say you are Chris Cox, the CEO of Hasbro, and your job is to make more money for your shareholders next quarter and next year. Should you double down on Play-Doh, maybe Furby, other consumer products where you might at best make a few pennies off of every dollar you sell? Or should you make more secret lair drops and Magic cards where 50% of every sale goes right into your pocket? The answer seems pretty obvious to me. This, at least for me, explains the huge proliferation of Magic products, the sets and the secret lairs. Making more of them equals more profits for Hasbro, while making more of Hasbro's other products either loses Hasbro more money or, in the best of times, only makes them a little bit of profit. Basically, and I should make it clear, I'm not an accountant or a lawyer, I'm a Magic player who also kind of is interested in finance, but as far as I can tell, Wizards of the Coast is quite literally the only part of Hasbro that makes money. So not only does Magic need to carry itself, but it also needs to carry a bunch of fading products and bad decisions from the past as well. After looking at these numbers, I actually don't think it's unfair to say that without Magic, Hasbro is actually pretty close to being bankrupt. So as we've seen so far, Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering are really the only very profitable parts of Hasbro. So as a result, Hasbro's making an ever-increasing number of Magic products in an attempt to make more money and keep their flailing consumer products and entertainment divisions afloat. But this leads to another question. Is this normal? Has it always been this way? And the answer to this question, I think, really explains how Magic has changed over the past decade. And once again, it kind of blew my mind. One thing I hear a lot from Magic players is that Hasbro buying Wizards of the Coast and buying Magic was really bad for Magic, or even the death of Magic, but that take just isn't grounded in reality. Hasbro bought Magic way back in 1999, in the 6th year of the game's existence. Today, the game is 32 years old, which means that Hasbro has owned Magic for like 80% of its life, through good times and through bad times. So it wasn't that Hasbro buying Magic was a bad thing. Actually, Hasbro buying Magic was a good thing for many years. So what changed? Well, in the past, Hasbro actually had other successful brands and segments. It was actually a relatively thriving company, and Magic was just another brand that it bought to help increase its gaming holdings alongside Monopoly and Life and such. And this is very different than the world that we live in today, where Magic is really the only thing Hasbro has going for them. To understand how Magic has changed over the past 10 years, let's go back to Hasbro's 2015 annual report. Back in 2015, Hasbro's segments were a little bit different. There was international, US and Canada, and then entertainment and licensing. And entertainment and licensing was the division that Magic was a part of at the time. Magic was rarely mentioned in the report, other than to be listed among other games as doing fine at several points in the report. The one time they actually called out Magic in specific, it was to talk about how they were actually investing a bunch of money into Magic, specifically to build a new digital platform for the game, which we now know is Magic Arena, which released a few years later in 2018 and 2019. In 2015, Magic's entertainment and licensing division had an operating profit of $76.9 million, while international had $255.4 million, and US and Canada $430.7 million. Even if we assume that Magic and Wizards was literally every bit of profit from the entertainment and licensing division back in 2015, which it almost certainly wasn't, considering that Hasbro itself called out its revenue from its recent purchase of Backflip Gaming, a mobile gaming studio that Hasbro bought back in 2013 and then shuttered in 2019, as being one of the major drivers of profit during the year. year. But even if Wizards and Magic was the only way that division made money, it would still mean that Wizards was only responsible for 11% of Hasbro's profits in 2015, compared to 82% last year, and more than 100% in the last 2 quarters. Basically, the last 10 years has turned Hasbro on its head. 10 years ago, Magic was a small part of a comparatively thriving toy company that was pulling in profits in a bunch of different ways. Today, Wizards of the Coast in general, and Magic in specific, are in a very real sense the only part of Hasbro that's making money, and it's making a lot of it. If you add all this together, at least for me, it explains pretty much everything about why Magic is the way it is today and how it has changed over the past decade. When it comes to big publicly traded companies, the single most important thing is that the line goes up quarter by quarter and year by year. That's what shareholders want and need, and if you're in the C-suite and want to keep your job, more than anything else, that is the one thing you have to make sure happens. In the past, Hasbro kept the line going up by selling Play-Doh to preschoolers. Actually, in 2015, preschool was actually the biggest demographic. That's where Hasbro made their most money, and preschoolers are definitely not buying Magic cards, but they made money selling Play-Doh to preschoolers and Peppa the Pig and Transformers and My Little Pony figurines, but in part due to changes around them, like people having less kids, kids being more interested in iPads and traditional games, and changing tastes, in part due to bad decisions on their part, with the biggest being buying Entertainment One for $4 billion in 2019, only to turn around and sell Entertainment One for just $500 million, an almost 90% decrease just 4 years later in 2023. Hasbro's other ventures have faded super hard in the past decade, as we've discussed with all this data. Now for Hasbro, Wizards and Magic are the only option to keep that line going up. And over the past few years, we've seen them double and triple dip on this strategy with more products, more sets, more secret layers, more cards, higher prices. I think this also explains the focus on universes beyond, which is not only more profitable than in-universe sets, at least when done well, like with Lord of the Rings and Final Fantasy, but is also Hasbro's best way to acquire new players, and new players are also needed to keep that line going up. Without a steady stream of new players coming into the game, Hasbro will sooner or later take all the disposable income from all of us existing players, and the line will stagnate. And the line stagnating is not acceptable. New players means new money, means, well, the line can keep going up. So if you want to know why Magic is what it is in 2025 and how the game has changed over the past decade, I believe this is the answer. It's all about money. It's all about that line going up. In the past, Magic was a small niche at Hasbro. It was profitable, but not a big focus at the company. Today, Wizards and Magic, in a very literal sense, are Hasbro. And as a result, they're quested not just with being profitable themselves, but also dragging along and subsidizing the corpses of many of Hasbro's dying properties. And because of this, it's pretty safe to assume that the future, at least for the short term, barring some seismic unpredictable shift, is going to look more or less the same. Magic's current job isn't to be the best game possible, it's to keep the Hasbro executives employed by keeping the line going up and keeping the shareholders happy by putting some money into their pockets. Hasbro simply doesn't have any other options, which means that Magic is going to be milked as hard as possible, as long as possible, because above all, that line must go up. Looking for even more Magic? Well, check out the video about the plays that change the very rules of the game, and you can also find the latest against the odds right here.